The Los Angeles Clippers have been one of the weirdest franchises in NBA history, to say the least. Even in recent years, they had one of the worst playoff breakdowns in NBA history, and the very next year, they had an underrated great playoff run. They're now without their franchise guy in Kawhi Leonard due to injury and are going into the 2021-22 season with very inconsistent expectations. And today, I want to talk about what we should expect from the Clippers this season.
They be like, yeah. Can you teach me how to dirty? You know why? Cause all the bitches love it. All I need is a beat that's super bumpin'. And for you to back it up and dump it.
Leave a like on this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I drop regular NBA content, and if that interests you, do subscribe to the channel. So as mentioned before, the Clippers are without their best player and top 5 to 10 player in the league in Kawhi Leonard. This greatly affects the team and lowers the expectations on this team without a doubt. They're without a doubt not going to be the contenders, but I'm really surprised that the general public has just written the Clippers off for this year. And the two reasons I'm surprised for this and I expect the Clippers to do better than most people are expecting are: one, we do not know if Kawhi is completely out for the year. Based on reports on how long an average NBA player takes to recover from the injury Kawhi suffered, they'll most probably be back before the playoffs. But knowing Kawhi, he'll probably take a little bit longer to be back and wait for his body to be 100%. And for that matter, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't return this year either. Even if he is back, there might be some chemistry issues for them to fit Kawhi into their system in the end of the season. But still, there's a very solid chance that Kawhi is back in time. And if he is back in time, there's a real chance the Clippers can be a dark horse in the Western Conference, and we really shouldn't write them off. And another reason I'm surprised that the general public has written the Clippers off for this year is Paul George. Paul George is a top 15 player in the league right now without a doubt. He was the main catalyst for the game 5 and 6 victories against the Utah Jazz when they were missing Kawhi. And he was the main reason why the Phoenix Suns series was so competitive. And people forget, it really hasn't been that long since Paul George went head to head against peak LeBron James in the playoffs and took him to a really competitive series as the best player on the opposing team. And guess what? The Paul George right now is better than the Paul George which took LeBron to Game 7. We do not give Paul George enough credit for coming back better than ever from one of the hardest injuries to overcome in sports history. Paul George is a very capable number one option and is going to surprise a lot of people this year. Sure, he's had many playoff lapses and it's fun to make pandemic P jokes, but last year's playoffs were really something. PG-13 is my dark horse to win MVP this year. He isn't far removed from the year where he finished top 3 in both MVP and DPOY, and he's actually better than he was then now. He has the entire team to himself, and he's also going to be the primary ball handler to this extent for the first time in a very long time. He took a massive leap as a playmaker last year, jumping up to a career high 5.2 assists per game. He also shot 41% from 3, which at the volume he took them was one of the most impressive 3-point shooting seasons. He's one of the best shooters in the league and one of the best 3-point shooters in the entire league. He has an amazing and smooth handle for his size, and his space creation ability alongside his amazing shot making makes it so hard to guard. He also shot a career high percentage from mid-range last year, while at the same time being an exceptional finisher at the rim. This gives him a lot of gravity as a player, and with him being the biggest scoring threat on the Clippers and possibly the only 20 plus point per game scoring threat on the Clippers, he'll without a doubt be the primary focus of opposing defenses night in and night out. This is going to give him a lot more challenges as a playmaker, and it's going to be interesting to see how he responds to these challenges. He'll also most probably have to guard the best player on the opposing team night in and night out, as the Clippers gave up Patrick Beverley and their best defender Kawhi is injured. The load on Paul George this season is going to be massive, and I expect him to do an amazing job with this load, and I expect him to be the major catalyst in whatever success the Clippers are going to have this year. Hence, he's my dark horse to win MVP and a player people should be giving more credit and people should be looking out for this season. So next, let's talk about the guard rotation of this team, which I also believe is a very quality rotation. The four guys who make up the Clippers guard rotation are Eric Bledsoe, Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, and Luke Kennard. Reggie Jackson is obviously the most notable name out of the four here, and it's for a very valid reason. Reggie had one of the most electric and exciting playoff runs last year, and was another big reason why the Clippers made it that far. He was one of the most efficient isolation scorers in the playoffs and showed up when it mattered the most, turning up from 11-3-3 in the regular season to 18-3-3 in the playoffs on amazing efficiency. The most impressive part about this is how well he played without Kawhi Leonard on the team, and how he did the best possible job to make up for Kawhi's loss, putting up 21.4 points per game since the game Kawhi got injured. His off-the-dribble game was off the charts, and he consistently took advantage of weaker defenders on him. No one expected Reggie Jackson to break out like that, and if the Clippers want a very successful team this year again, Reggie Jackson will have to be a solid number 2 alongside PG. I obviously don't expect him to put up the numbers he did in the playoffs without Kawhi, because if he does, we're talking about a completely different team. But what I do expect from him is to be an underrated second option and a good secondary ball handler and shot creator who can take the pressure off Paul George to a certain extent. Another move which has gone quite under the radar is the addition of Eric Bledsoe. Eric Bledsoe does suck in the playoffs and has been regressing in recent years. But he's still a guy who was the starting point guard on two amazing defensive teams and two first seed teams not very long ago. Sure, he might have been a massive reason why they lost the entire series, but I believe his role in the Clippers and the fit might prevent that from happening. Firstly, because he won't be relied on as a perimeter player like he was in Milwaukee, because the Clippers have both Paul George and Reggie Jackson. And then because all he has to do is hit open threes and play good defense. Even if he doesn't do these two things, the Clippers can always replace him with their backup guard in Terrence Mann, who will probably do this. And Eric Bledsoe by this point in his career is very experienced, and I expect him to provide quite a lot of value in this team when he's on the floor, and even if he isn't great and is off the floor, the Clippers aren't necessarily relying on him like the Bucks were to do anything in particular, aside from maybe some playmaking. So I think the Clippers will be just fine. Moving on, Terrence Mann is a player who I expect to have somewhat of a breakout season this year and flourish in his new role. Since the game Kawhi Leonard got injured, he averaged 13 points on 55 and 45 splits while having that monster 39-point game. He's an amazing cutter, reliable 3-point shooter, and a very solid defender. He isn't necessarily bad at anything and should have more responsibility as a player this year. He might be asked to guard the best player on the opposing team some nights, as it might be too much load on Paul George. He might be asked to handle more ball handling duties for the second unit of the Clippers. Basically, they might ask more from Terrence Mann based on how well he plays as the season progresses, and I really think he's going to have a great season and flourish in this role. Finally, Luke Kennard. Kennard had a weird season last year, playing inconsistent minutes after being extended. This year, he might be playing more minutes more regularly. He's a player who, if hot, can be really valuable to the team. He's a great spot-up shooter and a decent off-the-dribble shooter and an improving playmaker. It's just that his defense is so bad, he's played off the floor more often than not and isn't allowed to get to his groove offensively. I still don't expect him to be a good defender, but I hope he can at least develop into a passable one, or at least be able to get spot-up shooters in the corners, because offensively, I really think they have something with him, and he does have a lot of untapped playmaking potential, which can be really helpful for this team. Next up, let's talk about the forward rotation of the Clippers team. Nicholas Batum was a player they got last year, and no one expected him to be of much value because of how he played in Charlotte before seasons. But well, he proved everyone wrong, and to his credit, he was the main X factor on why the Clippers beat the Jazz. Batum is a good starting quality wing in the league. He can hit threes well and play defense. He also provides some playmaking to this Clippers team, which they can very much use. And another thing he allows them to do is play the 5-out lineup, which they did against Utah. He obviously isn't an exceptional defender and locks down other centers, but when there are guys like Porzingis and Gobert who can't really post up, he does a great job at guarding the pick and roll against them and allows the Clippers to play a defense where they can switch everything. So moving on, Marcus Morris Sr. was one of the best 3-point shooters in the league last year. He shot a ridiculous 47% from 3 on 5 attempts per game. He did this while providing very solid defense to the team and is another great wing on this team. Just last year, he averaged 20 points per game on the New York Knicks when he was one of the only scoring options on that team. With Kawhi gone, he'll have more shots to take and he should be another great wing and also flourish under this role. Another player who they got this offseason is Justice Winslow. So Winslow has had a very weird NBA career and to be honest, a quite inefficient one. Though there aren't many signs of it, I hope he can rejuvenate his career with the Clippers because he still has insane physical tools to be an amazing defender in this league and at least an average offensive player. Finally, let's talk about the center rotation of this team. Serge Ibaka is a player they brought in last off-season, but he couldn't provide them much value last year due to his injury-riddled season and his age actually catching up to him. He still can be an amazing interior defender, being a fierce shot blocker and just a massive person which makes it hard to go past him. On offense, he gives them floor stretching ability, which can make opposing teams have matchup problems. But the most important thing for him will be staying healthy, because if he can do that, he's a very solid role player in the league and a decent starting center at the least. But the center who might end up playing the most minutes for them is Ivica Zubac. Zubac is a much younger center who's a very decent player for them. He's a good defender and he can finish shots at the rim and you can't really ask much more from him. He was played out of the floor last year in the playoffs because the Clippers switched a lot on defense and all the elite perimeter players on opposing teams took advantage of him like Luka Doncic, Devin Booker and Chris Paul to name a few. Though the Clippers center rotation isn't absolutely amazing, they have some versatility here as they have a traditional big man in Zubac, a floor stretching big man in Ibaka, and when they really need to, they can always play Batum at the 5 and play their 5-out line. As you might have noticed, every player I talked about so far except for Zubac has one thing in common: their 3-point shooting. The Clippers' biggest strength this year is their 3-point shooting. Everyone on this team can shoot threes and they can shoot the 3 ball very well. They were the best 3-point shooting team efficiency wise, shooting a ridiculous 41% from 3, and they also had 7 or 8 players who shot above 40% from 3 on the season. They have the option to play lineups where all 5 of the players on the floor can shoot and more than one player can create a shot for themselves. They might have to play based on a particular half-court offensive system more this season and play similar to how the Jazz did last year. They have multiple guys who can create their own shot and multiple guys who are very good spot-up shooters. They can't run it to the level the Jazz did because they don't have the dominant pick and roll guard or the dominant pick and roll center like Mike Conley and Gobert, but they still have a lot of potential to be a great 3-point shooting team. 2 more players I really don't know what to expect from but are on this team are Keon Johnson and Brandon Boston Jr. Both of these rookies have some potential, but from what I've heard are very raw. I'm going to be honest, I haven't done much in-depth research on either of them, but from what I've heard, Brandon Boston Jr. was a highly touted prospect out of a star-studded high school team, but slowly started plateauing in college and didn't have a great college season. And Keon Johnson is a very athletic guy who has some finishing and shot-making ability. So basically my point is they have 2 very wildcard rookies who can be of great value for them this year. Finally, what are my expectations from this team and what should actually everyone expect from this team? So the teams I'm 100% sure are going to be better than them this year are the Lakers, the Nuggets, the Suns and the Jazz. The Warriors might be in this category based on how Klay comes back, but the point is they can still be a top 6 playoff team. It's going to be very hard for sure. It's going to be very hard to be better than the teams like Trailblazers and the Mavericks. But if they play their cards right, they can be a very dominant regular season team. And based on how early Kawhi comes back, they can be a real surprise team in the playoffs, and I wouldn't be surprised if they made a deep playoff run again. And yeah, that's all I have for you. Be sure to check out my other off-season content, and of course leave a like and subscribe to this video.